So, as is typically the case around this time of year, Assassin's Creed leak season has begun. So today I thought I'd go through some of the biggest supposed leaks for not only the next Assassin's Creed game, but also one based around Valhalla's DLC. And of course, it goes without saying that there's no absolutes here, and no matter how likely a leak may appear, nothing is set in stone until any official announcements happen. Now, this first leak is, to me, the most likely one here, but I feel as if there's been some sort of miscommunication or exaggeration between the leaker and their contact. The original 4chan leak this stems from proposes that Ubisoft are making, in a lot of ways, a spiritual successor to Rogue. Exciting. I know. The leak goes on to say the game is set in France during the 100 Years' War. It's set to release in early 2022 with a new engine and overhaul of the siege system from Valhalla, and he notes it's the darkest and grittiest game yet. Rogue 2, as I said. He also says it's meant to hold us over until a China game by Ubisoft Toronto coming in 2023. That on its own would be fairly easy to just write off given the abundance of fake AC leaks we've had from 4chan. But what gives this any sort of credence is the fact the leak was supported by a French YouTuber that covers AC named Jonathan. Now, for as random as that does sound, last year back in April, before Valhalla was even confirmed by Ubisoft, he leaked a bunch of information about the game that proved to be accurate. Some specific and harder to guess examples would include him saying the protagonist should be a woman but can be played as a man, that there would be lots of Isu related content, and then he was also right about when the game would be announced. Point is, whatever he says when it comes to AC leaks is at the very least worth listening to. In the back end of December, he posted this cryptic video of Richard of Lionheart's torso. Just stay with me here, I'll get to the point. Someone then replies with an article citing the 4chan post, and Jonathan replies saying there's some truth to it and also some falsehood. And the interesting part of this to me is rooting out what parts of the 4chan post are true and which aren't. Two things that immediately stick out to me are: one, Jonathan's tweet, as well as other less credible leaks, suggest the game is centered around Richard of Lionheart, so therefore the game can't be set in the 100 Years' War, as it began 150 years after he died. And secondly, there's no way Ubisoft would release a mainline AC entry at the beginning of the year. Even if it's a rogue type game, it wouldn't happen. Assassin's Creed is Ubisoft's fattest cash cow going, far and away, and they will certainly capitalise on that. I'd actually believe the leak far more if it said the game would release in the 4th quarter of this year, as that's looking very sparse for Ubisoft, with the only thing releasing in that period is presumably the new Rainbow game, which doesn't even have a release date yet. Keep in mind, Ubisoft aren't going to have another Far Cry, Watch Dogs or Prince of Persia game that will be ready in that time. And the biggest thing that puts me off this leak, and the biggest supposed game leak in this video, is an external factor, and that's that Jason Schreier hasn't made any comment on the game. For the last 7 years, Jason Schreier has been pretty much on the money with every AC leak and has often been the first to confirm them. And so the fact that he hasn't made any comment on the supposed France game takes away from this a lot for me. The leak says we'd have a new engine, basically, or if not a new engine, new gameplay system, sort of like the jump from Syndicate to Origins, and there's no way that will happen for a smaller, rumoured to be cross-gen game. In terms of parts of the leak I can believe, I think France kind of makes sense for a smaller roguelike game, as assets can be shared and reused from the Siege of Paris DLC, but I think it'd be more likely we'd see another Western European country that's similar enough to reuse those assets, namely Germany, as it'd be such an odd choice to set a game in France in 2014, a DLC in France in 2021, and then not even a year later have another game there. That is simply a nauseating amount of France, and Ubisoft don't really like to linger. Ubisoft Toronto being at the helm of this game is another weird one. They've never been the lead studio on an AC game and are currently leading the development of Far Cry 6, and that'd give them just a couple of months to make this game that apparently has a new engine. I just don't buy either of those things. What I think would be much more likely is that Ubisoft Sofia would make this game. They're a studio of around 200 who made Rogue and Curse of the Pharaohs. Also, they hired a writer named Alex Harakis as the lead scriptwriter on an unannounced project back in June, and I can't think of anything else that would be, and that's probably the biggest piece of evidence we have towards this being real. Although, as I say, I don't think all of this is true. There's parts of the 4chan post that are blatantly false, but with it being corroborated by not one, but two people who were so accurate with their Valhalla leaks, I think there's at least some truth to it. I think that there's a pretty solid chance we would get a smaller game to bide the time before the full-on next-gen game, because that next-gen game with not just new gameplay systems, but probably the Anvil Next 3.0 by that point, a game made on new hardware, is going to take 4 years at minimum to make given Ubisoft's history. And the teams I could think of that would be big enough to lead the development of that game, Quebec, Montreal 3 and Toronto, all finished games last year, or even this year, which without a smaller game in between would leave us with a 4-year gap. And also, a solely next-gen game right now, where not enough people have next-gen consoles, like proportionately far less people than there were in 2014, have next-gen consoles, that just wouldn't be financially feasible by Ubisoft standards. It wouldn't be a good move business-wise at all. So I think that this smaller cross-gen game will happen, but will be totally different to what's being described here. In regards to the mention of an AC game set in China, I've heard that a lot personally, and it's also been in a fair few of those surveys Ubisoft put out every so often, asking what settings we'd like to see. Personally, I think an AC game in 2023 set in China is definitely likely from what I've heard myself, and also the fact that this leak with at least some truth to it mentions this setting. Like, that seems like a pretty major thing to get wrong, but we are getting ahead of ourselves just a bit. AC India is a much easier rumour to break down than the France one, purely because there's been no indication that any part of this leak is true, and it's a pretty easy one to write off as false. It came again from a 4chan user, but this time nobody has corroborated it, but I suppose it's still worth looking at the actual leak and its own merits in and of itself, because every so often these do hold weight. We got this supposed map of India, which from the get-go raises some red flags. For one, the colour scheme is really odd, and generally it doesn't follow the conventions of an AC map. Also, it's odd to get a graphic at all with a leak. Like, in the Empire days we had legitimate Origins leaks with like low-res pictures of the game, but an actual graphic, that sort of throws me off, especially when it feels so fake, basically. At the bottom it says property of Ubisoft Montreal, which again is another detail that shouldn't be there, that's just sort of nudging you to believe it's real. I definitely think Montreal are going to split into AC teams again so that successive Montreal games are possible. It's my personal theory that they already have, and I would guess that another Montreal team, besides Montreal 3, have been working on the next gen game since 2019, given the fact that it'd take roughly 4 years and there's no other teams to fill the gap. Sort of like how things were back in the day. If I had to guess, I think that would be the China game, but not this. I'd break the leak down bit by bit, but the fact it comes off as more of a crowd pleaser than an actual leak, like him saying a Middle Eastern game is coming next, blows another hole in this one. And generally, any supposed leak that reads like a fan wish list tends to be wasting your time. Assassin's Creed Champion will be Ubisoft's first outing exclusively on next-gen consoles, as you can see with Champion's use of ray tracing and 4K. Ubisoft have really pushed this new, modern hardware to its limits. It's clear to see they've managed to significantly improve their facial animations and have crafted a more grounded and tight combat system than what we've seen in years. On a serious note though, this one obviously isn't real. As you can see, there's actually Templars in it, and brand iconography as well as palpable identity isn't a part of Ubisoft's current business model. So finally, we're on to the leaks about Wrath of the Druids, Valhalla's first DLC. Before I get into this, the leaker does go into some supposed plot details about the DLC that I won't mention, because on the off chance this is credible, it's probably better to go in blind. This is another 4chan leak that, as far as I know, no credible source has corroborated. It claims Wrath of the Druids will release in March, which already is a red flag. In their investors meeting, Ubisoft announced everything they had coming before April, and Wrath of the Druids wasn't one of those things. So that's something I totally discount, as well as his predicted release window for the Siege of Paris, which he had down as early June. The post claims the DLC heavily involves Halfdan and gaining the trust of Irish nobles, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Apparently Ireland, or this section of the East Coast, was meant to be in Valhalla but was cut due to COVID restrictions. So it wouldn't surprise me if the DLC was a cut arc from the game that's been expanded upon. Ubisoft have told us the DLC is about Eivor forming a trading relationship between Ravensthorpe and Dublin, so that really wouldn't shock me. Oh, if Ubisoft have gone and wasted Ireland by making it another backdrop for Eivor to inaugurate another king, or root out a traitor, and for it to be another cluster of monasteries that allow Eivor to terrorise the local nun population because that's just a cool pastime, I suppose, I will be beyond livid. But let's hope it's not another typical Valhalla arc or location. Generally, this seems like a fairly easy leak to write up if you have a basic knowledge of Viking history and the plot points of Valhalla. And as well, that release date being wrong is very suspect, although playing devil's advocate, it could have been internally delayed, I guess, but generally, this is one that I doubt. Anyway, let me know if you do or don't believe any of these, or even if there's any little details I've missed out or gotten wrong. Let me know if you think AC Dominance is still in the pipeline. I'd love to know. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, maybe leave a like, and if you didn't, maybe let me know why. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all next time.